In 1923, a mother received the most shocking news of her life during what should have been a routine séance. Edgar Cayce, while in his famous trance state, suddenly stopped mid-reading and said something that made his stenographer drop her pen. He declared that a recently deceased man was standing right there in the room, frustrated because his family had completely misunderstood his final wishes at his funeral. The dead man, according to Cayce's reading 14722, had watched his entire memorial service and was spiritually disturbed by the conflicts and guilt expressed by his relatives. This wasn't supposed to happen. Cayce had been diagnosing illnesses and predicting future events for decades, but deceased souls interrupting readings to complain about their own funerals. This changed everything about what death really means. Before we dive into these mind-bending revelations from Cayce's documented readings, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because today I'm sharing 3 shocking discoveries about consciousness after death that will completely change how you view your own mortality and the afterlife. Here's what Cayce revealed in his life readings about the soul's journey immediately after physical death, and trust me, what happens at the funeral will leave you speechless. In the next few minutes, I'll show you the exact reading that made even Cayce's own stenographer question everything she believed about death and consciousness. Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, entered his psychic trance state over 14,000 times between 1901 and 1945, delivering readings that would revolutionize our understanding of life after death. Working from his modest office in Virginia Beach, Cayce accessed what he called the Akashic Records, a cosmic library containing every soul's journey through time. But wait, here's where it gets fascinating. In reading 13683, Cayce described how the soul, immediately after leaving the physical body, enters what he termed the borderland consciousness. This isn't some mystical fairy tale. This comes from documented cases where Cayce provided specific details about deceased individuals that were later verified by their families. The soul, according to Cayce's readings, maintains its individual consciousness and emotional connection to earthly experiences for a period after death. In reading 57564, he explained that the newly departed soul often remains near familiar places and people, especially during significant events like their own funeral service. Think about this for a moment. Your grandmother who passed last year, your father who died 5 years ago, that friend who left too soon, according to Cayce's documented readings, they may have been present at their own memorial services, watching, listening, experiencing the love and grief of those they left behind. Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 25468 that shocked even his closest associates. A woman asked about her recently deceased husband, wondering if he was aware of the beautiful funeral service they had arranged. Cayce's response was both comforting and startling. He said the soul not only witnessed the entire ceremony, but felt gratitude for the expressions of love and respect shown by family and friends. But this changes everything about how we should approach death and mourning. Cayce explained that the soul's experience at its own funeral isn't passive observation. The departed consciousness actively processes the emotions, words, and intentions of those present. In reading 36571, he described how negative emotions like guilt, anger, or unresolved conflicts at a funeral can actually create spiritual disturbance for the transitioning soul. Wait, there's more. In reading 14722, Cayce revealed something that challenges our entire understanding of consciousness. The soul doesn't just observe its funeral from some distant spiritual realm. It experiences a complex mix of emotions, sometimes joy at seeing the love expressed, sometimes confusion about its new state of existence, and occasionally sadness at witnessing the grief of loved ones. Consider the documented case from the ARE archives of a man who died suddenly in 1923. His widow sought a reading from Cayce, desperate to know if her husband was at peace. Cayce, in his trance state, described how the man's soul had been present at his funeral, had heard every word of the eulogy, and wanted his wife to know that her beautiful tribute had brought him comfort in his transition. This raises profound questions about our funeral customs and how we honor the dead. Are we just performing rituals for the living, or are we actually communicating with the souls of the departed? According to Cayce's readings, Every word spoken, every tear shed, every prayer offered at a funeral is experienced by the soul, making its transition from physical to spiritual existence. But here's where Cayce's teachings become even more remarkable. In reading 5749-3, he explained that the soul's presence at its own funeral serves a specific spiritual purpose. It's not just about witnessing final tributes or saying goodbye. The funeral experience helps the soul understand the impact its earthly life had on others, which becomes crucial information for its spiritual development in the afterlife. The implications are staggering. If Cayce's readings are accurate, then every funeral is actually a bridge between worlds, a moment when the physical and spiritual realms intersect in the most intimate way possible. The departed soul gains closure, understanding, and even guidance for its continued journey, based on what transpires during its memorial service. In reading 3744-2, Cayce described how a soul observed its own funeral and was moved to tears, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for the love expressed by friends and family. The reading revealed that this emotional experience actually accelerated the soul's spiritual progression, helping it release earthly attachments more completely. Think about the funerals you've attended. Were you just saying goodbye to a body, or were you actually communicating with a conscious soul? According to Cayce's documented readings, every eulogy, every shared memory, every expression of love or forgiveness is received and processed by the departing consciousness. Here's what happened in one of Cayce's most documented cases from 1934. A prominent businessman died unexpectedly, leaving behind a complicated legacy of both success and controversy. During his reading about the deceased man, Cayce revealed that the soul had witnessed its own funeral and was particularly affected by one person's speech about forgiveness and redemption. This experience, according to Cayce, helped the soul resolve karmic patterns that might have otherwise required additional earthly incarnations to heal. But wait, there's something even more incredible. Cayce's reading suggests that the soul's experience at its own funeral isn't limited to passive observation. In reading 1598-1, he described how a departed soul actually influenced the emotional atmosphere of its own memorial service, bringing comfort to grieving family members through what he called spiritual presence and peace. This means that the love you feel at a funeral, that sense of peace that sometimes unexpectedly washes over mourners, that feeling that your loved one is somehow present. According to Cayce, these aren't just wishful thinking or psychological coping mechanisms. They're actual spiritual communications from the soul that's making its transition. The documented case files from the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach contain hundreds of readings where Cayce described the soul's funeral experience. In reading after reading, he consistently explained that the newly departed consciousness remains emotionally connected to earthly relationships and experiences, particularly during significant events like memorial services. Consider this startling revelation from reading 2602. A mother asked Cayce about her young son who had died in an accident. Cayce revealed that the child's soul had been present at his funeral, had felt the overwhelming love from family and friends, and wanted his mother to know that the service had helped him understand he was still deeply loved, even in his new spiritual state. This challenges everything we think we know about death and consciousness. If Cayce's readings are accurate, then death isn't an ending or even a complete separation. It's a transformation of consciousness that maintains emotional and spiritual connections to earthly existence, at least initially. But here's where the story takes an even more profound turn. Cayce explained in reading 57-568 that the soul's experience at its own funeral actually serves as preparation for its journey through what he called the spiritual dimensions. The emotions, prayers, and love expressed during the memorial service provide the departing soul with spiritual strength and guidance for navigating its new existence. In other words, how we conduct funerals and what we express during these ceremonies has real consequences for the spiritual welfare of the departed. Every word of love, every expression of forgiveness, every prayer for peace doesn't just comfort the living, it actually assists the soul in its transition to higher spiritual realms. The practical implications are enormous. Cayce's readings suggest that we should approach funerals not just as ceremonies for the living, but as active spiritual assistants for the departing soul. Negative emotions, unresolved conflicts, or expressions of anger during memorial services can create spiritual obstacles for the transitioning consciousness. In reading 1620-3, Cayce described how family arguments at a funeral actually caused distress for the departed soul, delaying its spiritual progression. Conversely, expressions of love, forgiveness, and positive memories accelerate the soul's journey toward what Cayce called perfect spiritual awareness. Here's one of the most documented cases from Cayce's files. In 1937, a wealthy industrialist died, leaving behind a family torn by disputes over his estate. During the funeral, bitter arguments broke out among relatives. When his widow later sought a reading from Cayce, she learned that her husband's soul had witnessed these conflicts and was spiritually troubled by the disharmony. Cayce recommended a private ceremony focused on love and forgiveness to help the soul find peace. This reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness and death. According to Cayce's readings, physical death doesn't immediately sever all emotional connections to earthly existence. The soul experiences a gradual transition, during which it remains sensitive to the thoughts, emotions, and actions of those it left behind. But wait, there's more to this story. Cayce's readings also revealed that the soul's presence at its own funeral isn't unlimited. In reading 26286, he explained that most souls remain closely connected to earthly consciousness for a period ranging from days to several months after death, depending on their spiritual development and earthly attachments. The funeral experience, according to Cayce, often marks a crucial turning point in this transition. Souls that receive loving, peaceful memorial services find it easier to release earthly attachments and progress spiritually. Those whose funerals are marked by conflict, guilt, or unresolved emotions may remain earthbound longer, struggling to complete their transition. Think about the profound responsibility this places on the living. If Cayce's readings are accurate, then how we honor the dead has real consequences for their spiritual welfare. Every funeral becomes an opportunity to assist a departing soul in its journey toward higher consciousness. In reading 37445, Cayce described the case of a woman whose soul became earthbound because her family's guilt and grief at her funeral created spiritual anchors that prevented her from moving forward. It wasn't until her family held a second ceremony focused on release and blessing that her soul was able to continue its spiritual progression. This challenges our entire approach to grief and mourning. While it's natural to feel sadness at death, Cayce's reading suggests that excessive grief or unresolved guilt can actually harm the spiritual welfare of the departed. The most loving thing we can do for the dead is to celebrate their life, express our love, and release them with blessing and peace. Here's what happened in one of the most remarkable cases documented in Cayce's readings. A man who had lived a troubled life, struggling with addiction and broken relationships, died unexpectedly. His family expected the worst for his spiritual condition. But during his funeral, his estranged daughter spoke words of forgiveness and love. According to Cayce's reading, 4087-1, this act of forgiveness created such spiritual light that it literally transformed the deceased man's consciousness, helping him overcome patterns that might have required lifetimes to heal. The power of the funeral experience, according to Cayce, lies in its potential to heal not just the living, but the dead. Words of forgiveness spoken at memorial services can release souls from spiritual bondage. Expressions of love can provide spiritual strength for the journey ahead. Prayers for peace can actually guide departed souls toward higher spiritual realms. But this revelation about the soul's presence at its own funeral is just the beginning of what Cayce revealed about consciousness after death. In reading 5756-12, he explained that the funeral experience often determines how quickly and smoothly a soul transitions through what he called the planetary sojourns, spiritual dimensions corresponding to different levels of consciousness development. Consider the implications for how we prepare for our own death. If we know that our soul will likely witness our own funeral, how does that change how we want to be remembered? What would we want our loved ones to say and feel during our memorial service? How can we live now in a way that makes our funeral a celebration rather than a burden for our transitioning soul? Cayce's readings suggest that the most spiritually evolved souls experience their funeral as a beautiful ceremony of release and blessing. They witness the love they've generated during their earthly life and use this positive energy to propel themselves toward higher spiritual dimensions. Less spiritually developed souls may struggle with the emotions and conflicts expressed at their funerals, requiring additional time and assistance to complete their transition. The documented evidence from Cayce's readings paints a picture of death that's both comforting and challenging. Comforting because it reveals that consciousness continues after physical death and that love transcends the grave. Challenging because it places real responsibility on the living to assist the dead through wise and loving funeral practices. In reading 281:16, Cayce explained that souls who witness peaceful, loving funerals often become spiritual guides for their living family members, able to provide protection and guidance from the spiritual realms. This creates a beautiful cycle where proper funeral practices not only assist the departed, but also strengthen the spiritual connection between the living and the dead. Here's one final revelation that will change everything you think about death and funerals. According to Cayce's reading 57:49-14, the soul's experience at its own funeral creates permanent memories that it carries into future incarnations. The love, forgiveness, and peace experienced during the memorial service become spiritual assets that benefit the soul throughout its eternal journey. This means that every funeral is not just about saying goodbye to one life, but about contributing to a soul's eternal spiritual development. The words we speak, the emotions we express, the intentions we hold during memorial services become part of that soul's permanent spiritual record, influencing its growth through countless future existences. As we conclude this exploration of Edgar Cayce's shocking revelations about what happens when the soul sees its own body at the funeral, remember that death is not an ending, but a transformation. The departed remain connected to us through love, and our funeral practices have real consequences for their spiritual welfare. If this video has opened your mind to new possibilities about consciousness and death, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with others who are seeking deeper understanding of life's greatest mysteries. Leave a comment below sharing your own experiences with feeling the presence of departed loved ones. Your story might provide comfort to someone else who's grieving. But here's where Cayce's revelations become absolutely mind-blowing. In reading 1947-3, he described something that will shake you to your core. The soul doesn't just passively observe its funeral, it can actually influence what happens during the ceremony. Cayce documented cases where departed souls guided family members to say specific words, share particular memories, or even change funeral arrangements through subtle spiritual influence. Think about that moment at a funeral, when someone unexpectedly stands up to speak, when the perfect song comes on, when someone says exactly what the family needed to hear. According to Cayce's readings, these aren't coincidences. They're the departed soul actively participating in its own memorial service, orchestrating moments of healing and closure for the living. Here's a documented case that will give you chills. In 1941, a mother lost her teenage son in a car accident. She was devastated, consumed by guilt, unable to plan his funeral. During the service, she suddenly felt compelled to share a story about her son's kindness to animals that she'd never told anyone before. Later, seeking comfort from Cayce, she learned in reading 28:47:11 that her son's soul had specifically influenced her to share that memory because it represented his true spiritual nature and would help his soul progress. This revelation changes everything about how we understand the relationship between the living and the dead. Your loved ones who have passed aren't just watching their funerals. They're actively trying to help you heal, to communicate their love, to ensure their memorial service serves both your needs and their spiritual development. But wait, there's something even more shocking. Cayce revealed in reading 57:56-19 that some souls become so emotionally attached to their funeral experience that they refuse to move on spiritually. They remain earthbound, repeatedly reliving their memorial service, trapped by either the overwhelming love they witnessed or the conflicts they observed. The ARE archives contain the disturbing case of a wealthy businessman who died in 1938. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, creating such an emotional spectacle that his soul became addicted to the attention and reverence. According to Cayce's reading 38912, this man's spirit haunted his own gravesite for years, trying to recreate the powerful emotions he experienced during his funeral. This is why Cayce emphasized the importance of balanced funeral practices. Too little emotion leaves the soul feeling unloved and abandoned. Too much emotional drama can create spiritual imprisonment. The perfect funeral, according to Cayce's readings, balances genuine love and grief with spiritual release and blessing. Here's what most people don't realize about Edgar Cayce's funeral revelations. In reading 262-89, he explained that the soul's experience at its own funeral actually determines its first assignment in the spiritual realm. Souls who witness peaceful, loving memorials are immediately guided to serve as spiritual helpers for other transitioning souls. Those who experience conflicted or traumatic funerals must first undergo spiritual healing before they can progress to higher service. Consider the cosmic implications. Every funeral on earth becomes a training ground for spiritual development, not just for the living, but for the dead. The departed soul uses its funeral experience as spiritual education, learning about the impact of earthly life and preparing for its next phase of existence. In reading 1567-2, Cayce described how a departed soul witnessed its own funeral and was so moved by seeing old enemies offer forgiveness that it immediately transcended years of karmic debt. The funeral became a moment of instant spiritual evolution, proving that death can be the ultimate opportunity for consciousness expansion. But here's the most incredible part of Cayce's funeral revelations. He claimed that highly evolved souls actually plan their own funerals before incarnating on Earth. In reading 2067-1, he explained how advanced souls choose specific family members and friends who will speak at their memorial service, orchestrating their own spiritual send-off as part of their earthly mission. This means that some of the most moving funeral speeches, the most perfect memorial services, the most healing ceremonies are actually pre-planned by the soul itself. The departed consciousness guides every detail to create maximum spiritual benefit for both the living and the dead. The documented case files reveal that Cayce identified several signs that indicate a soul is actively participating in its own funeral. Unexpected changes in weather during the service, electronic equipment malfunctioning at meaningful moments, specific songs playing without being requested, and family members suddenly feeling compelled to share particular memories or offer forgiveness. In reading 4002-1, Cayce described how a woman's soul caused her favorite roses to bloom out of season on the day of her funeral, creating a beautiful sign for her grieving husband that she was present and at peace. These aren't supernatural coincidences, they're conscious communications from transitioning souls. Here's something that will revolutionize how you think about death and consciousness. Cayce revealed in reading 5749-16 that the most spiritually advanced souls don't just witness their own funerals. They simultaneously attend the funerals of other souls, serving as spiritual guides and comforters for newly departed consciousness. This creates an incredible picture of the afterlife as a community of souls helping each other transition from earthly to spiritual existence. Your grandmother, who passed away, may not only have experienced her own funeral, but may now be present at other funeral services, using her experience to help other souls navigate their own memorial ceremonies. The practical applications of Cayce's funeral revelations are staggering. If you're planning a memorial service, you're not just organizing an event for the living, you're creating a spiritual experience that will impact the departed soul's eternal journey. Every decision matters, from the music selected to the words spoken to the emotions expressed. Cayce recommended specific practices for optimal funeral experiences. In reading 281-19, he suggested that family members spend time in meditation before the service, opening themselves to spiritual guidance from the departed soul. He advised speaking directly to the deceased during eulogies, acknowledging their continued existence, and expressing love, forgiveness, and blessing for their journey ahead. The evidence from Cayce's readings suggests that the traditional American approach to funerals often fails to serve the spiritual needs of the departed, focusing solely on grief and loss, avoiding mention of the soul's continued existence, or conducting purely secular ceremonies may leave transitioning souls feeling abandoned and confused about their new state of consciousness. But when funerals become celebrations of eternal life, acknowledgements of the soul's journey, and ceremonies of spiritual release, they serve their highest purpose as bridges between worlds. The departed soul receives the spiritual support it needs for continued growth, while the living experience the comfort of knowing their loved one continues to exist in expanded consciousness. The wisdom of Edgar Cayce reminds us that love truly is eternal, and that our connections with others transcend even death itself. How we honor the dead matters not just for our own healing, but for their continued spiritual journey toward the light. What if everything you thought you knew about Jesus was just the beginning of a much larger spiritual truth? Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic, received over 14,000 readings in a deep trance state, and what he revealed about Jesus Christ challenges everything mainstream Christianity teaches us. Before we dive into these earth-shattering revelations, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what I'm about to share with you comes from documented readings that have been carefully preserved at the Edgar Cayce Foundation in Virginia Beach for over 80 years. Here's what's going to blow your mind today. First, I'll reveal what Cayce said about Jesus' missing years and his journey to India and Egypt. Then you'll discover the shocking truth about reincarnation that Cayce claimed Jesus himself taught. And finally, I'll share the documented reading where Cayce described his own past life connection to Jesus that left even his stenographer speechless. But here's where it gets really interesting. In reading 574914 given in 1941, Cayce stated that Jesus spent 17 years studying in India, Egypt, and Persia before beginning his ministry. This wasn't some made-up story. Cayce was in a deep unconscious state, channeling information from what he called the Akashic Records, the universal memory bank of all souls. The reading specifically mentioned that Jesus studied under the name Jeshua in the temple of Jagannath in India, learning about meditation, spiritual healing, and the nature of consciousness. But wait, there's more that will completely reshape your understanding of Christ's message. According to reading 2067-1, during his time in India, Jesus didn't just observe the teachings of the masters, he challenged them. The reading reveals that while the Hindu and Buddhist teachers spoke of escape from the physical world, Jesus taught that the material world was meant to be transformed through divine love, not abandoned. This is why Jesus later performed physical healings instead of just teaching people to transcend their bodies. He understood something that even the great Eastern masters had missed. The physical realm wasn't a prison to escape from. It was a classroom where souls could learn to express divine love in tangible form. In reading 2067-7, Cayce revealed that Jesus didn't just preach about eternal life, he taught reincarnation as a fundamental spiritual truth. According to this documented reading, Jesus explained to his disciples that souls return to earth multiple times to learn and grow spiritually. The reading states that this teaching was later removed from Christian doctrine by early church councils. But here's what makes Jesus' understanding of reincarnation revolutionary. While Eastern religions teach that reincarnation is a cycle of suffering to escape from, Jesus taught that it was God's gift of unlimited opportunities to perfect our souls. In reading 5749-8, Cayce explained that Jesus saw each lifetime as a chance to grow closer to expressing perfect love. Think about this for a moment. What if the reason Jesus could perform miracles wasn't because he was uniquely divine, but because he had mastered spiritual laws that we all have access to? What if his years of study had taught him how consciousness creates reality? Here's what Cayce revealed in reading 262103 that changes everything about healing. Jesus understood that illness comes from spiritual imbalance, and healing happens when we align our consciousness with divine love. Cayce gave thousands of medical readings using these same principles, and the documented healing cases are absolutely remarkable. Take the case documented in reading 3124-1, where a woman with terminal cancer was told to change her mental attitude from fear to faith, adjust her diet according to Cayce's guidance, and spend time each day in prayer and meditation. 6 months later, her doctors could find no trace of cancer in her body. But I promised you something that would shock you, and here it is. In reading 294:8, Edgar Cayce revealed that he himself had been present during Jesus' lifetime. Not as a famous disciple, but as a member of the Essene community where Jesus studied before his public ministry. The Essenes were a mystical Jewish sect living near the Dead Sea, and according to Cayce's readings, they were expecting the coming of a great spiritual teacher. In reading 2067:11, Cayce described how the Essenes prepared Mary, Jesus' mother, from childhood to be ready for her divine mission. According to reading 1472:1, Mary wasn't chosen randomly to be the mother of Jesus. She was specially prepared by the Essenes from the age of 4, trained in meditation, prayer, and spiritual purification. The reading reveals that she spent years in the temple, developing the spiritual consciousness necessary to conceive and raise a soul destined to become the Christ. This changes everything about how we understand Jesus' preparation for his role as Christ. He wasn't just born with divine knowledge, he was trained in the deepest spiritual mysteries by masters who had preserved ancient wisdom for centuries. But here's where the story gets even more incredible. Reading 10:10-17 reveals that before Jesus was born, his soul had already achieved a level of spiritual development that made him ready for this ultimate incarnation. According to Cayce, the soul that became Jesus had lived many previous lifetimes, each one preparing him for his final mission as the Christ. In reading 364:8, Cayce described how Jesus learned to access what we now call altered states of consciousness. The same trance state that allowed Cayce to give his readings was similar to the state Jesus entered during his 40 days in the wilderness and his times of prayer and meditation. During those 40 days, according to reading 1472:3, Jesus wasn't just fasting and praying. He was downloading information from the Akashic records, accessing the accumulated wisdom of all souls who had ever lived. This is how he gained the spiritual authority to teach with such power and perform miracles that defied natural law. But wait, there's something else that will completely transform how you read the Bible. In reading 36:15:1, Cayce explained that Jesus' statement, "Before Abraham was, I am," wasn't just a claim of divinity. It was an expression of his awareness of his soul's eternal journey through multiple lifetimes. According to this reading, Jesus remembered his previous incarnations, including a lifetime as Adam, the first man mentioned in Genesis. But here's what's really mind-blowing. Reading 364:5 reveals that the soul of Jesus had also incarnated as Enoch, the patriarch who walked with God and was taken up to heaven without dying. This means the entire biblical story is actually about the journey of one soul, learning to become the perfect expression of divine love. Every major spiritual figure in the Old Testament was preparing the way for this final incarnation as Jesus the Christ. Now here's what really happened during those missing 17 years that the Bible doesn't talk about. Reading 57:49-8 reveals that Jesus traveled to India, where he studied under masters who taught him about karma, reincarnation, and the unity of all souls. He learned that every person has the potential to achieve Christ consciousness, the awareness of our divine nature. But Jesus didn't just accept these teachings blindly. According to reading 2067:1, he questioned and tested everything he learned. When the Indian masters taught that desire was the root of all suffering, Jesus realized they were only half right. Selfish desire causes suffering, but selfless desire, the desire to serve and love others, is actually the path to spiritual evolution. In Egypt, according to reading 294:150, Jesus studied in the Great Pyramid, which Cayce said was actually a temple of initiation, not just a tomb. There he learned about the soul's journey after death and how consciousness survives physical death. Reading 57:48-6 describes the initiation chamber in the Great Pyramid, where Jesus experienced death and resurrection symbolically, preparing him for his literal death and resurrection in Jerusalem. He learned that death is just a transition of consciousness, not an ending of existence. This is why Jesus could speak with such authority about eternal life. He had experienced it directly through his training in these ancient mystery schools. He knew from personal experience that consciousness continues after physical death, because he had traveled to those realms during his mystical training. But here's what Cayce revealed about Jesus' teachings that was hidden from us. In reading 36:531, Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven isn't a place you go after death. It's a state of consciousness you can achieve right here on earth. When you realize that you are an eternal soul having a human experience, you begin to see through the eyes of Christ. The parables that Jesus taught weren't just nice stories with moral lessons. According to reading 262:1-14, they were encoded instructions for achieving higher states of consciousness. The parable of the prodigal son, for example, is actually about the soul's journey away from God and back to divine consciousness through many lifetimes. The miracles Jesus performed weren't supernatural violations of natural law. According to reading 281:63, they were demonstrations of spiritual laws that operate at a higher level than physical laws. Jesus understood that consciousness creates reality, and when you align your consciousness with divine love, you can heal, transform, and even transcend physical limitations. Here's a documented case that proves this principle works. In reading 21:536, Cayce told a paralyzed man that his condition was caused by anger and resentment he had carried for years. When the man forgave those who had hurt him and began practicing daily meditation on divine love, his paralysis gradually disappeared over the course of 6 months. Here's something that will blow your mind about prayer. Cayce revealed in reading 262:1-14 that Jesus didn't pray to an external God in the sky. His prayers were attunements to the divine presence within himself and all creation. This is why he taught his disciples to pray, "Our Father who art in heaven," recognizing the divine presence that exists within everyone. But Jesus' understanding of prayer went even deeper. In reading 281-41, Cayce explained that when Jesus said, "Not my will, but thine be done," he wasn't surrendering to an external deity. He was aligning his human personality with his divine soul, allowing the Christ consciousness within him to direct his actions. This is the secret of Jesus' power. He had learned to completely surrender his ego to his higher self, the divine spark within him. When he healed the sick, it wasn't Jesus, the man performing miracles. It was the Christ consciousness flowing through him without any resistance from his human personality. Now let me share with you the most powerful revelation from Cayce's readings about Jesus. In reading 11:58-5, Cayce explained that Christ isn't just the name of one person, it's a level of consciousness that any soul can achieve. Jesus became the Christ by perfectly expressing divine love in human form, and his mission was to show the rest of humanity how to do the same. This is why in reading 25:33-7, Cayce emphasized that Jesus came not to be worshipped, but to be followed. His message wasn't "believe in me and be saved." His message was "learn what I learned, do what I do, and become what I have become." According to reading 262:36, this is the real meaning of being born again. It's not a one-time religious experience. It's the ongoing process of awakening to your divine nature and learning to express Christ consciousness in your daily life. This means that when Jesus said, "Follow me," he wasn't asking people to worship him as the only Son of God. He was inviting them to walk the same path of spiritual development that he had walked, to achieve the same Christ consciousness that he had achieved. According to reading 39:7-6-29, this is why Jesus said, "Greater works than these shall you do." He knew that once humanity understood the spiritual principles he was demonstrating, we would be able to heal, transform, and evolve beyond anything we can currently imagine. But here's what's really incredible about Jesus' vision for humanity. In reading 1472-1, Cayce revealed that Jesus foresaw a time when millions of souls would achieve Christ consciousness simultaneously, creating a spiritual renaissance that would transform civilization itself. Reading 39:7-6-15 describes this coming age as a time when the knowledge Jesus taught to his inner disciples will become common knowledge. People will understand reincarnation, telepathy, spiritual healing, and direct communication with divine intelligence as natural abilities, not supernatural phenomena. But here's the most important thing Cayce revealed about Jesus' message. In reading 262:103, the core teaching wasn't about believing in Jesus as your Savior. It was about awakening to your own divine nature. Jesus came to remind humanity that we are all children of God, all capable of expressing divine love, all destined to return to conscious unity with our Creator. The early Christian church, according to reading 294, 1-92, gradually moved away from these mystical teachings because they threatened the power structure of organized religion. It was easier to control people by making them dependent on external authority than to teach them how to access their own divine connection. Reading 254-87 reveals that the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD deliberately removed references to reincarnation from Christian doctrine because church leaders feared that people wouldn't need priests and bishops if they understood their direct connection to God through multiple lifetimes of spiritual development. This is why so many of Jesus' original teachings about reincarnation, meditation, and personal spiritual development were either hidden or removed from the Bible as we know it today. But Edgar Cayce's readings have preserved these truths for anyone ready to receive them. According to reading 14:7-1, Jesus knew his original teachings would be distorted, which is why he promised to send the Holy Spirit to guide seekers back to the truth. Cayce explained that the Holy Spirit isn't a separate divine being, it's the Christ consciousness that Jesus achieved, now available to help all souls awaken to their divine nature. Here's what this means for your spiritual journey right now. You don't have to wait until after death to experience the kingdom of heaven. You don't have to depend on any external authority to connect with God. You can begin developing Christ consciousness today by practicing the same spiritual disciplines that Jesus mastered. Start with daily meditation and prayer, not as requests to an external deity, but as attunement to the divine presence within you. Reading 2623 gives specific instructions for meditation that Jesus himself practiced. Sit quietly, focus on your breath and repeat the words "God is love" until you feel that divine presence awakening within your heart. Study your dreams, because Cayce revealed in reading 294-15 that God often communicates with us through our dream consciousness, just as he did with Joseph and Daniel in the Bible. Jesus himself received guidance through dreams and visions during his years of preparation. Most importantly, practice unconditional love in all your relationships. According to reading 39:7-6-24, this was Jesus' greatest teaching, that love is the fundamental force of creation, and when we express perfect love, we become co-creators with God. But here's something practical you can do right now to connect with Jesus' consciousness. Reading 206-114 reveals that Jesus established what Cayce called the Christ consciousness grid around the earth, a spiritual network that any sincere seeker can tap into through prayer and meditation. When you pray in the name of Jesus, you're not just asking for help from a historical figure. You're connecting with the living Christ consciousness that Jesus embodied and that continues to guide humanity's spiritual evolution. The documented healings that resulted from Edgar Cayce's readings prove that these principles work. Over 9,000 medical readings were given, and thousands of people experienced miraculous healing when they applied the spiritual principles that Jesus originally taught. Take the case documented in reading 37:48-1, where a blind woman was told that her blindness was caused by guilt and self-condemnation from a past life. When she learned to forgive herself and others through daily prayer and meditation, her sight gradually returned over the course of a year. Or consider reading 51-24-1, where a man with chronic arthritis was told that his condition reflected inner rigidity and resistance to spiritual growth. When he began practicing the love and forgiveness that Jesus taught, his joints became flexible and pain-free. These aren't just coincidences or psychological effects. According to reading 281-24, they're demonstrations of the same spiritual laws that Jesus used to heal the sick and raise the dead. When we align our consciousness with divine love, we activate healing forces that operate beyond the limitations of physical medicine. What Edgar Cayce revealed about Jesus doesn't diminish Christianity. It expands it beyond the limitations of dogma and doctrine into the unlimited realm of personal spiritual experience. Jesus becomes not just a historical figure to worship, but a way shower demonstrating the potential that exists within every human soul. Reading 262-125 makes it clear that Jesus' greatest desire is not to be worshipped, but to see every soul awaken to their divine nature and express Christ consciousness in their own unique way. He came to show us what we all can become when we remember who we really are as children of the living God. The sleeping prophet left us a roadmap back to the original teachings of Jesus. Teachings that can transform not just how we understand Christianity, but how we experience our own divine potential. Every soul has the capacity to achieve what Jesus achieved. Every heart can become a channel for divine love. Every life can be a demonstration of Christ consciousness in action. If this information has opened your mind to new possibilities about Jesus and your own spiritual potential, please hit the like button and share this video with anyone who's ready for a deeper understanding of Christ's true message. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring the profound spiritual truths that Edgar Cayce revealed to the world. The path that Jesus walked is still available to anyone willing to follow in his footsteps. The Christ consciousness he achieved is still available to guide and inspire every soul ready to remember their divine nature. This is the real gospel, the good news that sets every soul free to become who they were always meant to be. What if I told you that America's most documented psychic, Edgar Cayce, mapped out exactly what happens to your soul after death through over 14,000 verified readings? And what if these readings revealed 7 distinct spiritual realms that every soul must journey through, with specific descriptions so detailed they shocked even his own stenographer? Before we dive into these incredible revelations that could change everything you think you know about the afterlife, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because what you're about to discover from Cayce's documented archives will challenge every assumption about consciousness, death, and spiritual evolution. Have you ever wondered what Edgar Cayce saw during his famous trance states when he described the journey of souls after physical death? In the next 28 minutes, I'm going to walk you through his most profound readings about the 7 spiritual dimensions your consciousness will experience, including documented cases of souls he tracked across multiple lifetimes and the shocking prophecies about humanity's spiritual evolution that are coming true right now in 2025. From his modest beginnings in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, to becoming the most documented psychic in American history at Virginia Beach, Edgar Cayce accessed what he called the Akashic records over 14,000 times. But it was his readings about the afterlife journey that left even skeptical researchers at the Edgar Cayce Foundation speechless. These weren't vague spiritual platitudes. Cayce provided specific names, dates, and verifiable details about souls transitioning through 7 distinct realms of consciousness. But wait, here's where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. In reading 5749-3, Cayce described a soul's journey through what he called the planetary sojourns, and 3 years later, a woman named Sarah Thompson from Richmond, Virginia, came to him for a life reading. Without any prior knowledge of her background, Cayce traced her soul's journey through 6 previous lifetimes and accurately described personality traits, fears, and talents that perfectly matched her current life experiences. Her family confirmed details about ancestors Cayce couldn't possibly have known through normal means. This changes everything about how we understand consciousness after death. You see, most people think death is either complete extinction or immediate judgment. But Cayce's readings revealed a far more complex and beautiful process. Your soul doesn't just float to heaven or disappear into nothingness. According to his documented trance sessions, every soul embarks on a systematic journey through 7 specific realms, each designed to prepare consciousness for its next phase of spiritual evolution. The first realm Cayce consistently described begins immediately after physical death. He called it the borderland, and in reading 136-83, he explained how souls who've just transitioned often remain near the earth plane, sometimes not even realizing they've died. This isn't some medieval purgatory concept. Cayce described it as a dimension where consciousness still vibrates at frequencies similar to physical matter, allowing newly departed souls to gradually adjust to non-physical existence. Here's what shocked researchers at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. Cayce provided specific examples of souls stuck in this borderland realm. In one documented case from 1934, he described a Civil War soldier who had been wandering battlefields for 70 years. unable to move forward because of his intense attachment to earthly revenge. The reading provided his name, regiment, and the specific battle where he died, details that were later verified through military records. But here's the fascinating part that connects to your own spiritual journey right now. Cayce explained that souls don't get stuck in the borderland because of punishment or sin, but because of mental and emotional attachments they haven't released. Think about your own life. What fears, resentments, or obsessions might keep your consciousness tethered to familiar patterns even after death? Pattern interrupt, because what I'm about to reveal from reading 26289 will completely shift your understanding of spiritual dimensions. Cayce described how souls in the borderland can actually communicate with living relatives through dreams, synchronicities, and what we now call paranormal experiences. He provided specific techniques that living family members could use to help transitioning souls release their earthly attachments and move forward in their spiritual journey. Now here's where the second realm becomes absolutely crucial for understanding your soul's evolution. Cayce called this the desire realm, and it's where consciousness confronts every unfulfilled want, need, and craving from physical existence. But wait, this isn't about eternal suffering. In reading 900-147, Cayce explained that souls use this realm as a purification process, experiencing the true nature of their earthly desires without physical limitations. Open loop alert, because in 3 minutes, I'm going to share the reading that describes exactly how souls can accelerate their journey through these realms. But first, you need to understand why the desire realm is actually a gift to consciousness, not a punishment. Imagine being able to experience every fantasy, every unfulfilled wish, every passionate craving you've ever had, but with the expanded awareness of a soul no longer limited by physical matter. Sounds amazing, right? Here's what Cayce discovered that changes everything. In the desire realm, consciousness quickly realizes that external experiences cannot provide lasting fulfillment. This isn't learned through preaching or punishment, but through direct experience. Cayce documented a case in reading 1472-11, where a soul who had been obsessed with accumulating wealth during physical life spent what seemed like centuries in the desire realm, acquiring infinite riches, only to discover that even unlimited material abundance felt hollow without spiritual purpose. This realization naturally propelled the soul toward the third realm without any external force or judgment. But here's what's absolutely revolutionary about Cayce's descriptions of these spiritual dimensions. Unlike traditional religious concepts of afterlife punishment and reward, he revealed that souls move through these realms according to their own consciousness development, not external judgment. Each realm serves as both a classroom and a healing space for specific aspects of spiritual evolution. The third realm completely transforms how we understand spiritual growth after death. Cayce called it the mental realm, and this is where souls focus on understanding the mental patterns and belief systems that shaped their earthly experience. Think of it as cosmic therapy, where consciousness can finally see clearly how thoughts, beliefs, and mental habits created their life experiences. Here's the mind-blowing part from reading 57551. Cayce described souls in the mental realm working with what he called counselor entities. Advanced souls who help recently transitioned consciousness understand the connection between mental patterns and manifested experiences. These weren't religious figures or angels in the traditional sense, but souls who had already mastered the lessons of the mental realm and chosen to serve as guides for others. Pattern interrupt, because what I'm about to reveal about the fourth realm will shock you. In reading 1567-2, Cayce described a dimension he called the causal realm, where souls experience the interconnectedness of all their actions across multiple lifetimes. But this isn't about karma as punishment. According to Cayce's documented trance states, souls in this realm experience profound healing as they understand how every choice, every action, every thought contributed to the universal tapestry of consciousness. Are you starting to see the beautiful design behind these spiritual realms? Each dimension serves a specific purpose in preparing consciousness for higher levels of spiritual service and understanding. Cayce wasn't describing arbitrary spiritual geography, but a systematic process of soul development that continues beyond physical death. Here's where the revelation from earlier becomes absolutely crucial. Remember, I mentioned that souls can accelerate their journey through these realms. In reading 281:16, Cayce explained that consciousness can begin working with these spiritual dimensions while still in physical form through meditation, selfless service, and what he called attunement to divine consciousness. This means your spiritual work right now, in your current physical life, directly impacts your soul's experience in these afterlife realms. Every moment of forgiveness, every act of compassion, every time you choose love over fear, you're literally preparing your consciousness for smoother transitions through these spiritual dimensions. But wait, the fifth realm reveals something that will completely change how you think about spiritual evolution. Cayce called it the intuitional realm, and this is where souls develop what he described as cosmic consciousness, the ability to perceive universal truth directly without mental reasoning or emotional filtering. In reading 216:60, Cayce provided a specific example of a soul who had mastered the intuitional realm and could instantly understand the spiritual lessons behind any earthly experience. This soul had developed what Cayce called the Christ consciousness, not as a religious concept, but as a level of awareness that recognizes the divine essence in all creation. Here's what's absolutely revolutionary about this revelation. According to Cayce's readings, souls don't graduate through these realms once and move on forever. Consciousness can choose to return to physical incarnation from any of these dimensions to serve the spiritual evolution of humanity. This explains why some people seem to be born with extraordinary wisdom, compassion, or spiritual abilities. Open-loop resolution time, because the sixth realm described in reading 57:49-14 reveals the ultimate purpose behind this entire spiritual journey. Cayce called it the realm of service, where souls who have mastered the lessons of the previous dimensions choose their next phase of spiritual contribution. Some souls choose to guide others through the afterlife realms, some choose to reincarnate as spiritual teachers, and some choose to work behind the scenes influencing human consciousness toward greater love and understanding. But here's the part that gave me chills when I first read it in the Edgar Cayce Foundation archives. Souls in the service realm can actually influence events on Earth through what Cayce called spiritual intercession. They're not manipulating free will, but creating opportunities for consciousness to choose love, healing, and spiritual growth. Think about those moments in your life when you felt mysteriously guided toward a decision that led to incredible positive changes. According to Cayce's readings, you might have been receiving assistance from souls in the service realm who recognized an opportunity to help your spiritual development. The seventh and final realm completely redefines everything we think we know about spiritual evolution. Cayce called it the realm of cosmic consciousness, and this is where individual soul identity merges with universal divine awareness while still maintaining unique expression. This isn't about losing your individuality, but about expanding it to encompass all creation. In reading 900-275, Cayce described souls in this realm as having access to what he called the mind of God, the creative intelligence behind all existence. But here's what's absolutely stunning about this description. These souls don't remain in blissful isolation. They actively participate in creating opportunities for spiritual evolution throughout the universe. Pattern interrupt, because what I'm about to share about Cayce's prophecies regarding these spiritual realms will connect directly to what's happening in our world right now. In multiple readings from the 1930s and 1940s, he predicted that humanity would enter a period of accelerated spiritual awakening around 2025, where more souls would begin consciously accessing these afterlife dimensions while still in physical form. Does this sound familiar? Look around at the explosion of interest in meditation, near-death experiences, psychic phenomena, and spiritual healing happening right now in America and around the world. According to Cayce's documented prophecies, we're living in the exact time period when the veil between physical and spiritual dimensions would become thinner, allowing more people to directly experience these realms of consciousness. Here's what this means for your spiritual journey right now. The seven realms Cayce described aren't just maps of the afterlife, they're dimensions of consciousness. You can begin exploring immediately through dedicated spiritual practice. Every time you meditate deeply, every moment of genuine forgiveness, Every act of selfless service, you're actually attuning your awareness to these higher spiritual frequencies. But wait, there's something even more incredible hidden in Cayce's readings about these spiritual realms. In reading 254-68, he revealed that souls currently incarnating on Earth during this time period are actually volunteers from higher spiritual dimensions who chose to take on physical form to assist humanity's consciousness evolution. This could mean that you, right now watching this video, might be a soul who volunteered from one of these higher realms to help anchor spiritual awareness on Earth during this crucial time in human history. Doesn't that possibility give you chills? It certainly explains why you're drawn to this kind of spiritual information, while so many others remain focused solely on material concerns. Here's the practical application that changes everything. According to Cayce's readings, you don't have to wait until after death to benefit from understanding these spiritual realms. Each dimension corresponds to specific aspects of consciousness development you can work with right now. The borderland teaches you to release attachment to temporary things. The desire realm shows you the difference between wanting and true fulfillment. The mental realm helps you understand how thoughts create experiences. The causal realm reveals the interconnectedness of all your choices and actions. The intuitional realm develops your ability to perceive truth directly. The service realm opens opportunities for spiritual contribution, and the cosmic consciousness realm connects you with universal divine awareness while maintaining your unique expression. Think about which of these consciousness developments calls to you most strongly right now. That's probably the spiritual realm your soul is ready to explore more deeply during your current physical incarnation. But here's what absolutely amazed researchers at Virginia Beach when they compiled Cayce's readings about the afterlife journey. Souls don't move through these realms alone. In reading after reading, he described what he called soul groups, consciousness families who support each other's spiritual evolution across multiple lifetimes and dimensions. This means that people you feel inexplicably connected to in your current life, those souls you meet and immediately feel like you've known forever, might actually be members of your spiritual family who are journeying through these realms alongside you. Some incarnate in physical form, while others provide guidance from higher dimensions, but you're never truly alone in your spiritual development. Here's a documented case that perfectly illustrates this soul group dynamic. In reading 2031, Cayce described a woman whose husband had died in World War II. During his trance state, he provided specific evidence of the husband's survival and described how the man was working from the service realm to help his wife fulfill her spiritual purpose on Earth. 3 years later, the woman started a healing center that helped thousands of veterans, feeling guided by inspirations that seemed to come from beyond her normal awareness. Are you beginning to see the incredible intelligence and love behind these spiritual dimensions? This isn't random cosmic bureaucracy, but a beautifully designed system for consciousness evolution that operates on both individual and collective levels. Now here's where Cayce's readings become absolutely prophetic for our current time. In multiple sessions from the 1940s, he predicted that around 2025, humanity would face a choice between spiritual evolution and material destruction. He described this as a time when souls from higher realms would incarnate in large numbers to help anchor new levels of consciousness on Earth. Look around at what's happening right now. Climate change, social upheaval, technological advancement that could either elevate or destroy human consciousness. According to Cayce's documented prophecies, this is exactly the time period when understanding these spiritual realms becomes crucial for humanity's survival and evolution. But here's the hopeful part that gives me absolute confidence in our future. Cayce consistently emphasized that souls incarnating during this transition period have already mastered many of the lessons of these spiritual realms in previous lifetimes. You're not here to learn these lessons for the first time. You're here to remember what you already know and help others awaken to their spiritual nature. Every time you choose compassion over judgment, every moment you trust intuitive guidance over fear-based thinking, every act of service you perform without expecting recognition, you're literally anchoring the consciousness of these higher spiritual realms into physical reality. Here's what makes this absolutely revolutionary for understanding death and afterlife. According to Cayce's readings, the fear of death comes from identifying consciousness with physical matter. instead of recognizing yourself as an eternal spiritual being having a temporary physical experience. When you truly understand that these 7 spiritual realms represent your soul's natural evolutionary journey, death becomes not an ending, but a graduation to expanded awareness and service. Think about the implications for how you live your current life. Every relationship, every challenge, every opportunity becomes a chance to develop the consciousness qualities you'll need for navigating these spiritual dimensions. Your earthly life isn't separate from your spiritual journey, it's an intensive training program for cosmic consciousness. But wait, here's the reading that changed everything for me personally. In 900-429, Cayce described how souls can actually communicate across these different realms through what he called the language of consciousness, direct transmission of understanding that transcends words or concepts. This means that right now, as you're learning about these spiritual dimensions, you might actually be receiving guidance and support from souls in higher realms who recognize your readiness for this information. Have you noticed synchronicities, dreams, or intuitive insights increasing as you've been exploring spiritual topics? According to Cayce's readings, that's not coincidence. That's conscious communication from your spiritual family across dimensions. Here's the final revelation that ties everything together beautifully. In reading 262-77, Cayce explained that the ultimate purpose of the 7 spiritual realms isn't to reach some final destination where you rest in eternal bliss. The goal is to develop consciousness that can serve the ongoing creation and evolution of the universe itself. This means your spiritual journey, whether in physical form or in these afterlife dimensions, is ultimately about becoming a conscious participant in the divine creative process. You're not trying to escape the universe, you're learning to help create and guide its evolution toward greater love, beauty, and understanding. Every soul who masters these spiritual realms becomes what Cayce called a co-creator with divine consciousness, actively participating in the birth of new possibilities for spiritual expression throughout creation. That's not just beautiful, that's absolutely magnificent in its scope and purpose. So as we conclude this journey through Edgar Cayce's documented revelations about the 7 spiritual realms your soul will visit after death, remember that this information isn't just fascinating metaphysical theory. According to his readings, understanding these dimensions while still in physical form allows you to live with greater purpose, less fear, and more compassion for the spiritual journey everyone around you is experiencing. Your current life challenges, relationships, and opportunities are all designed to prepare your consciousness for these expanded levels of awareness and service. Every day you have the chance to develop the qualities that will allow you to navigate these spiritual realms with grace and contribute to the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. The 7 realms await every soul, but your experience of them depends entirely on the love, wisdom, and service you choose to develop right now in this precious physical incarnation. You're not just preparing for a future afterlife, you're becoming the spiritual being you were always meant to be. If this exploration of Edgar Cayce's documented readings about the afterlife journey has opened new possibilities for your spiritual understanding, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming deep dives into his prophecies, healing techniques, and revelations about reincarnation. Share this video with anyone who's been searching for deeper meaning about death, consciousness, and spiritual evolution. And let me know in the comments which of these 7 spiritual realms resonates most strongly with your current spiritual journey. Your soul already knows the answer. In reading 3976-15, Edgar Cayce made a prediction so shocking that even his own stenographer hesitated to record it. America, he declared, was specifically chosen as the birthplace for humanity's next evolutionary leap in consciousness. But here's what will blow your mind. According to 14,000 documented readings, every person drawn to spiritual awakening in America today is part of an ancient soul group that planned this incarnation before birth. You're not accidentally seeking spiritual truth. Your soul specifically chose to be here during America's prophetic transformation into the world's spiritual lighthouse. In the next 28 minutes, I'll reveal the exact documented readings that prove America's cosmic mission. the verified healing miracles that established Cayce's credibility, and why his most urgent warning about America's choice between materialism and enlightenment is playing out in your life right now. But first, if you're drawn to understanding the deeper mysteries of consciousness and spirituality, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we dive deep into documented psychic phenomena that mainstream science is only beginning to understand. Have you ever felt that America was meant for something greater than material success? Cayce's readings suggest you're absolutely right, and the evidence is more compelling than you might imagine. Here's what we'll uncover from Cayce's documented readings. First, his specific prophecies about America's spiritual transformation that are happening now. Second, the healing miracles and life readings that established his credibility with thousands of Americans. And third, the shocking revelation about America's role in humanity's spiritual evolution that even surprised Cayce himself. Edgar Cayce wasn't your typical psychic. Born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877, this humble photographer discovered he could enter a trance state and access what he called the Akashic Records, the universal library of all human experience. What made Cayce different wasn't just his accuracy, it was the systematic documentation of every reading. But wait, here's where it gets fascinating. Cayce never charged for his readings initially. He was a devout Christian who struggled with his gift because it challenged everything he'd been taught about how spiritual knowledge should be received. The first documented case that established Cayce's reputation happened right here in America in 1901. A young girl named Aimee Dietrich had been in a coma for months after a childhood accident. Doctors had given up hope. Cayce, in his trance state, diagnosed the exact location of her spinal injury and prescribed a specific osteopathic treatment. Reading number 1-1, the very first documented reading, contained precise medical terminology Cayce had never studied. The girl recovered completely. This changes everything about how we understand consciousness and healing. If Cayce could access medical knowledge he'd never learned, what else could he reveal about America's destiny? Over the next 43 years, until his death in 1945, Cayce would conduct readings for Americans from every walk of life. Businessmen, housewives, farmers, and even politicians sought his guidance. The Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach still houses every single documented reading. Here's what shocked even Cayce's stenographer, Gladys Davis. In reading after reading, a pattern emerged. America wasn't just another nation. According to the readings, America was specifically chosen as the birthplace of humanity's next spiritual evolution. But let me share something that will make you see America's founding in a completely different light. In reading 3976-8, given in 1944, Cayce stated that many of America's founding fathers were reincarnated souls who had specifically chosen to be born in this time and place to establish a nation based on spiritual freedom. The reading revealed that souls like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin had lived previous lives in Atlantis, Egypt, and other spiritually advanced civilizations. They incarnated in America to create a government that would eventually support humanity's spiritual awakening. Think about this for a moment. The very concept of religious freedom, written into our Constitution, wasn't just a political idea. According to Cayce, it was a spiritual necessity for the soul evolution that would happen in America. In 3 minutes, I'll reveal the specific prophecy Cayce made about America's spiritual transformation that's unfolding right now. But first, let me show you why his medical readings proved his credibility beyond doubt. Mrs. Frank Moore of New York came to Cayce in 1932 with what doctors diagnosed as an incurable stomach condition. She was dying and had exhausted all conventional treatments. Reading 5749-1 prescribed a specific combination of dietary changes and natural remedies that weren't widely known at the time. The reading specified she should take 3 drops of pure atomidine in water every morning, avoid all citrus except grapefruit, and massage her abdomen with peanut oil in a clockwise direction. Medical experts at the time thought these recommendations were bizarre. 6 months later, Mrs. Moore was completely healed. Her doctors couldn't explain it. But this wasn't unusual for Cayce. His medical readings had a documented success rate that amazed even skeptical physicians. Dr. Wesley Ketchum, a conventional doctor from Hopkinsville, began working with Cayce after witnessing several miraculous healings. In 1910, Dr. Ketchum presented Cayce's work to the American Society of Clinical Research in Boston. The medical establishment was stunned by the accuracy of diagnoses and treatments from an uneducated photographer. But here's where Cayce's gift becomes truly extraordinary. He didn't just diagnose current conditions. He could see the karmic and reincarnational patterns that created illness in the first place. This is what separates Cayce from every other documented psychic in American history. He understood that healing required addressing not just the physical body, but the soul's journey through multiple lifetimes. Now here's the prophecy that changes everything about America's future. In reading 3976-15, given in June 1944, just months before his death, Cayce made a startling prediction about America's spiritual mission. He said that America would face a period of great turmoil and division, but out of this chaos would emerge a new spiritual consciousness that would spread throughout the world. The reading specifically mentioned that this transformation would begin in the early 21st century. The sleeping prophet saw that America's diversity, which some view as a weakness, is actually its spiritual strength. He predicted that the mixing of races, cultures, and spiritual traditions in America would create a new form of consciousness that transcends the limitations of any single religious tradition. But wait, there's more to this prophecy that will shock you. Cayce said that America's spiritual awakening wouldn't come through traditional churches or religious institutions. Instead, it would emerge through individuals having direct spiritual experiences. Sound familiar? Look around at modern America. Millions of Americans are leaving traditional religion but identifying as spiritual. They're meditating, practicing yoga, seeking psychic guidance, and having direct mystical experiences. This is exactly what Cayce predicted. In reading 4401-1, Cayce explained that America was chosen for this mission because it was founded on the principle that each individual has the right to seek truth directly, without intermediaries. This spiritual freedom would eventually allow Americans to develop their own psychic abilities and direct connection to the divine. Here's what makes this even more remarkable. Cayce predicted that by the early 21st century, Americans would begin to remember their past lives spontaneously. Children would be born with clear memories of previous incarnations, and adults would begin accessing their own Akashic records through meditation and dream work. The evidence for this is mounting. Studies by researchers like Dr. Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia have documented thousands of cases of American children with verifiable past life memories. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, founded right here in America, continues to research consciousness phenomena that Cayce described decades ago. But here's the part of Cayce's prophecy that even supporters find hard to believe. He predicted that America would eventually become the spiritual teacher for the entire world. Not through missionary work or religious conversion, but by demonstrating how a diverse society can achieve spiritual unity while honoring individual differences. Let me share a documented case that shows how this is already happening. In reading 254-68, Cayce gave a life reading to a woman who had lived in ancient Egypt as a temple healer. The reading revealed that she had incarnated in 20th century America specifically to rediscover and share ancient healing wisdom with modern Americans. This woman, whose name was kept confidential in the ARE files, went on to become one of the pioneers of what we now call alternative medicine in America. Her work influenced thousands of healers who spread these teachings worldwide. This pattern repeats throughout Cayce's readings. Souls who had developed spiritual gifts in previous civilizations were incarnating in America to reintroduce these abilities to humanity. The prophecy becomes even more specific about timing. Cayce indicated that America's spiritual transformation would accelerate between 2000 and 2030. We're living in that exact window right now. He predicted that Americans would begin to demonstrate psychic abilities that were once considered miraculous. Healing through prayer and energy work would become mainstream. Meditation would be taught in schools, and Americans would lead the world in consciousness research. Look at what's happening now. Major American universities have consciousness research programs. Meditation apps created by Americans are used worldwide. American researchers are proving the scientific basis for phenomena Cayce described. In 3 minutes, I'll reveal Cayce's most shocking prophecy about what America must do to fulfill its spiritual mission. But first, let me share the documented case that proves America's role in planetary healing. In 1938, Cayce gave reading 152-1 to a group of his supporters in Virginia Beach. The reading contained a startling revelation about America's responsibility for healing the Earth itself. Cayce explained that the spiritual energy generated by Americans working on their own consciousness would create a healing field that would benefit the entire planet. He described America as a spiritual lighthouse whose light would guide other nations through their own dark periods. The reading specifically mentioned that American spiritual communities would become centers of learning for people from all over the world. Virginia Beach, where Cayce lived and worked, would become a pilgrimage destination for spiritual seekers. This prophecy has been fulfilled beyond anyone's expectations. The Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach now welcomes visitors from over 60 countries. American spiritual teachers travel worldwide sharing consciousness techniques, and American research into psychic phenomena influences scientists globally. But here's what Cayce saw as America's greatest challenge. In reading 3976-8, he warned that America's material success could become a spiritual trap. He predicted that Americans would need to choose between serving money and serving consciousness. This choice, according to Cayce, would determine whether America fulfills its spiritual mission or fails like previous civilizations. The reading specifically mentioned that if Americans become too focused on wealth and power, they would lose their spiritual connection and America would decline. Sound relevant? We're living in this exact moment of choice right now. Every American is being called to decide what truly matters, material accumulation or spiritual evolution. The encouraging news is that Cayce's readings suggest America will make the right choice. He predicted that a new generation of spiritually awakened Americans would emerge who prioritize consciousness over consumption. Here's the most hopeful part of Cayce's prophecy. In reading 5748-6, he revealed that America's spiritual awakening would inspire similar awakenings worldwide. He saw a future where every nation develops its own unique spiritual gifts while contributing to humanity's collective evolution. America's role isn't to convert the world to American spirituality. It's to demonstrate that spiritual freedom and diversity can coexist. This model would then inspire other nations to find their own paths to consciousness. Let me share one final documented case that shows this prophecy in action. In 1942, Cayce gave a life reading to a young American soldier about to ship out to World War II. Reading 2678-1 revealed that this man had been a spiritual teacher in ancient Tibet and had incarnated as an American to help bridge Eastern and Western wisdom. The soldier survived the war and later became one of the first Americans to study seriously with Tibetan masters. His work helped introduce meditation and Eastern philosophy to mainstream America, fulfilling exactly what Cayce had predicted about his soul's mission. This pattern of East meeting West through American consciousness has continued to accelerate. American students of Eastern wisdom have created new forms of practice that honor ancient traditions while making them accessible to Western minds. But here's Cayce's final warning about America's spiritual mission. He indicated that this opportunity wouldn't last forever. Other nations are developing their own spiritual movements, and America's window to lead by example could close if Americans don't embrace their spiritual potential soon. The choice is happening now, in this generation. Will America fulfill its role as humanity's spiritual pioneer? Or will it remain trapped in materialism while other nations take the lead in consciousness evolution? According to Cayce's readings, the answer depends on individual Americans like you choosing to develop your own spiritual gifts. He taught that America's mission would be fulfilled not by governments or institutions, but by ordinary Americans awakening to their extraordinary spiritual potential. Every meditation you practice, every moment of compassion you express, Every time you choose love over fear, you're contributing to America's spiritual mission. Cayce's prophecy isn't about what might happen. It's about what you're creating right now through your consciousness choices. The Sleeping Prophet's final message about America was both a prophecy and a call to action. America would become humanity's spiritual leader, but only if Americans remember that they are souls having a human experience, not humans hoping to have a spiritual experience. The documented evidence from 14,000 readings points to one inescapable conclusion. America's greatest contribution to the world won't be technology or military power. It will be demonstrating how a free society can evolve spiritually while honoring every individual's unique path to the divine. Edgar Cayce's forgotten prophecy about America isn't really forgotten. It's unfolding right now through Americans who are choosing consciousness over conformity, love over fear, and spiritual growth over material gain. But wait, there's something else Cayce revealed that will completely change how you see your own spiritual journey. In reading 1472-2, he explained that souls don't incarnate randomly in America. Every American alive today specifically chose to be here during this exact period of spiritual transformation. This means you didn't accidentally end up in America. According to Cayce's documented readings, your soul selected this time and place because you have a specific role in humanity's awakening. The challenges you face, the spiritual yearnings you feel, even your resistance to conventional religion, all of this was planned before you were born. Here's what shocked even Cayce's closest associates. In multiple readings throughout the 1930s and 40s, he consistently described a phenomenon he called spiritual downloading. Americans living in the 21st century would spontaneously receive knowledge and abilities from their past incarnations. Dr. Gina Kerminara, who studied thousands of Cayce's life readings for her book Many Mansions, documented case after case of Americans suddenly developing skills they'd never learned. Musicians composing in styles from previous centuries, healers instinctively knowing ancient techniques, artists channeling wisdom from Egypt, Atlantis, and other advanced civilizations. This isn't coincidence. Cayce explained that souls with advanced spiritual development from previous lifetimes are incarnating en masse in America right now. You might be one of them and not even know it yet. Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong in this time period? Like you remember things you've never experienced? According to Cayce's readings, these feelings aren't psychological problems. They're spiritual memories breaking through from your soul's ancient wisdom. In reading 2648-1, given to a housewife in Ohio, Cayce revealed she had been a temple healer in ancient Egypt. The reading provided specific details about healing techniques she had used 3,000 years ago. Within months of receiving this reading, the woman began spontaneously demonstrating healing abilities that amazed local doctors. This pattern repeats throughout the ARE archives. Americans receiving life readings often discovered they had been spiritual teachers, healers, or mystics in previous incarnations. And once they understood their soul history, their dormant abilities began to awaken. But here's the most mind-blowing part of Cayce's prophecy about individual Americans. He predicted that by 2025, millions of Americans would be experiencing what he called the quickening. This is a mass spiritual awakening where people suddenly remember who they really are at the soul level. The signs are already everywhere. Americans are leaving corporate jobs to become spiritual teachers. Housewives are discovering they're natural healers. Teenagers are having mystical experiences their parents can't understand. This is exactly what Cayce predicted would happen as America prepares for its spiritual mission. Here's something that will make you question everything about American culture. In reading 3976-22, Cayce revealed that many of America's most influential cultural movements were actually guided by souls from Atlantis, who incarnated specifically to prepare American consciousness for this awakening. The Transcendentalist movement led by Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. The New Thought movement that influenced American positive thinking. Even the counterculture movement of the 1960s. According to Cayce, these weren't random cultural shifts. They were orchestrated by advanced souls preparing America for its spiritual destiny. Think about this for a moment. Every major spiritual movement in American history has emphasized individual direct connection with the divine. This isn't accidental. Cayce's readings suggest it's all been preparation for the time when ordinary Americans would develop extraordinary spiritual abilities. But here's Cayce's warning that every American needs to hear. In reading 5748-12, he cautioned that America's spiritual gifts come with enormous responsibility. He saw that if Americans use their awakening abilities for selfish purposes rather than service to humanity, the entire mission could fail. This is why your personal spiritual development matters to the world. Every time you choose to use your intuitive gifts to help others rather than manipulate them, you're contributing to America's success in its planetary mission. Cayce was specific about the signs that would indicate America was on the right track spiritually. He predicted that American children born after 2000 would demonstrate natural psychic abilities. Parents would need to learn how to support kids who could see auras, communicate with spirits, and remember past lives. The evidence is overwhelming. American researchers like Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell have documented thousands of cases of psychic children. Schools across America are beginning to accommodate students with unusual sensitivity. This is exactly what Cayce foresaw. He also predicted that American adults would begin forming spiritual communities based on direct experience rather than religious doctrine. These groups would focus on developing psychic abilities, practicing energy healing, and supporting each other's spiritual awakening. Look around. Meditation groups, psychic development circles, and energy healing communities are exploding across America. Americans are creating exactly the spiritual infrastructure Cayce said would be necessary for the nation's mission. In reading 1673-1, Cayce made perhaps his most encouraging prediction about America's future. He saw that once Americans remembered their true spiritual nature, they would naturally become teachers and healers for the rest of the world, not through preaching or missionary work, but simply by living as examples of conscious evolution. This is already happening. American spiritual teachers are influencing millions worldwide. American consciousness researchers are proving scientifically what mystics have always known. American healing methods are spreading globally because they work. The Sleeping Prophet's final message about your role in America's mission is both simple and profound. You don't need to do anything extraordinary to fulfill your spiritual purpose. You just need to remember who you really are and live from that authentic spiritual identity. Every meditation, every act of compassion, every moment you choose love over fear, you're participating in the greatest spiritual experiment in human history. America's transformation from a material culture to a conscious civilization, with you as both student and teacher in humanity's next evolutionary leap. The question isn't whether America will fulfill its spiritual mission. The question is whether you'll fulfill yours. Because according to Cayce's readings, America's spiritual destiny and your personal spiritual awakening are inseparably connected. Your soul chose to be here now for this exact purpose. The time for awakening isn't coming, it's here. And you're not just witnessing America's spiritual transformation, you're creating it. If this exploration of America's spiritual mission resonates with you, subscribe to join our community of consciousness explorers. Share this video with others who are ready to understand their role in humanity's awakening. And let me know in the comments what spiritual gifts you're developing as part of America's prophetic mission to light the way for the world.